Recording.
Okay, let's bring this meeting to order. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Landscape Architect Committee of the Board of Architectural and Engineering Examiners, taking place at 308 Fethergill Hall at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And notice of this committee meeting was posted on the board website on September 25th, 2017. So we're roll call.
Robert Camp. Blair Parker.
Here.
Frank Waxter. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We're thrilled to be here at Vanderbilt, and Associate Dean Pascal just joined us for a moment and introduced herself, which was a wonderful thing. So I have several things I would like to discuss with this committee, and with our schedule, our agenda, I would really like to, under new business, I'd like to put the CLARB annual meeting report. Let's go through it first, if we can. John Cawthorn and I both attended this meeting. It was for me, a very worthwhile meeting, and you know I'm still relatively new at this. So I'm learning, every time I turn around I've learned something new, and I've heard some fascinating things. Let me give you an example. Arizona and California don't require CEUs. And I don't know why, I was surprised. I'm sure my jaw was on the ground and they're looking at me like, you know, what's wrong, buddy? You know. But we had some great conversation, learned a tremendous amount. The summary report from the meeting is in the packet, and there's a lot of really good things discussed here. And I have a few additional things to go through. For me, what I came away with was, as landscape architects, we need to focus on who we are. And there is so much confusion out in the public as to what a landscape architect is, because they confuse us with those who do planting, installation, or landscape designers, and certainly we're different. And that seems to be one of the biggest takeaways, but then how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis as a profession? And we went through many scenarios, heard various examples where people talked about their situation with their state and what they were able to do. There were, I believe, 3 states that had gone through consolidation or reorganization. John, you have written that in here.
Kentucky, Ohio, Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. They have some interesting stories as well. But all of this to say that the environment, it just seems that it's out there, and we as a group need to watch out for what is happening, and do our best to educate ourselves and to be there for one another. And for me, since we are a combined board, that crosses over to the various professions we have within our own board as well. So it was a really strong learning moment for me to hear some of the stories and maybe some of the examples of things, maybe the crazy things that you hear about and you're not sure if they're really real. Well, sometimes they are. You know, much has to do with confusion in the industry. We talked about the model law at the end of the session. Went through a fairly long discussion of the model law and discussed it in smaller groups. CLARB is certainly our guide when it comes to the profession of landscape architecture, and as in CLARB's eyes, the environment, the licensure environment is changing day by day. So we need to be prepared for anything that comes down, and as the generations change, CLARB is also needing to change, and so that's why they're wanting to have younger people involved and finding ways to get younger people involved in in the organization itself. So I think that's a good thing. We have talked amongst ourselves about how the younger design generation, or just younger people, are different than my older generation, and how they approach things. And I know it's hard to believe, but I think it's a good, healthy thing for us to have that healthy respect and understand that they too need to be in the planning of what we as landscape architects do. John, is there anything else you'd like to add about the CLARB meeting in Boise, Idaho?
Well, just there was definitely an emphasis on reasonable regulation at the meeting in the face of the current anti-regulatory or deregulatory climate. So, and that's reflected in the model laws and rules that were adopted at the meeting. That they definitely address that concern that regulation needs to be reasonable, not unnecessarily inhibit trade and people's ability to enter the profession. So that was really stressed a lot. We had a presentation on the North Carolina dental decision. Big surprise there. Just about every conference we attend, they have an update on that. But the attorney that made the presentation noted that there are lawsuits regarding, I guess, antitrust actions in about 24 lawsuits around the country. 8 states have taken executive action to address that concern, and also 20 states have passed legislation. Tennessee is one of them. And this is Robert Campbell. So that's pretty much it. Robert.
It was a very useful meeting for me. I learned a tremendous amount.
A couple of questions. As it relates to Tennessee, I'm not aware of any legislation at this point attacking the regulation of landscape architecture. Now, I've seen it in other states. Indiana comes to mind. The thing I'm going to ask you is, we've discussed defining what an architect or engineer and so forth is, and a landscape architect. And so far, you've been kind of anti having a definition. Was there any discussion of that? Does that help that in any way if it's defined?
Interestingly, because I go to the CLARB meeting, that's one of the main things that I'm struggling with and trying to figure this out. It's about a 50-50 split of the states that define landscape architecture and those that don't. Maybe
same thing with architecture.
Is it? Okay.
It's 29-25.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know that I have a problem with it per se. Our work scooches. Our work is right there next to we do the site work, which is typically the engineering side of the design profession. And what I would not want to do is to define ourselves and define us so rigidly that it cuts us out of some work that we are currently doing, and yet having an engineering definition or lack thereof that is wide open. And I think that's where we as a profession are. I believe that's where ASLA sits, that moment. I have spoken to ASLA at their executive committee meeting at the last conference up in Knoxville about a little bit over a month ago, 2 months ago. And they are not anxious to define the profession of landscape architecture, because if you look across the nation, the definitions of landscape architecture vary so greatly.
Right.
And I think it's just one of those elements that they know is going to take a tremendous amount of work to get something where everybody would be satisfied with it.
They haven't found that yet.
No, they have not found it yet.
But CLARB does have
They do.
model definition.
Yes, they do. In the model law, that's exactly right. They sure do.
Yeah, they just amended it this year.
Mm-hmm.
What did it change?
It changed very significantly. The model law definition
Got long.
No, it's actually much shorter.
Oh, okay.
They fleshed it out in the model regulations. That's where it has the long bullet points. But the actual definition in the law is very short, very concise. So I think that's the difference. Originally, a lot of what's in the regulation was in the law itself.
Right.
They switched it. Yeah.
But Frank, this too is something that I have placed out there for ASLA to see if I get any friction, any kind of comment from ASLA. We don't have any official correspondence from them on that. So I'm curious as to where they sit on this.
So you're seeking input from ASLA on whether they would be interested in adopting a definition?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a few other things.
They jumped right on that.
Well, and if we can shift, because I think all of this relates. The reason I wanted to review the CLARB meeting and what came out of the CLARB meeting first is because it sort of dovetails into the next discussion, defining the profession of landscape architecture.
That's sincere. I was standing right outside the building when I talked to you, and it had one little thing on the door, so Feathergill Hall.
Good afternoon.
That's
I saw a little blue sign that said Feathergill Hall with an arrow on it.
Thanks for the little blue sign. Too bad.
I came up to the back.
That helped me get here. It sure did. It sure did. Okay, well, welcome. We are in the landscape architect committee, and we're discussing defining the profession of landscape architecture. We've discussed the CLARB meeting that John, Catherine, and I both attended. And so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to shift down to the potential law, rule, and policy changes, which dovetails, Frank, into this overall discussion. As the state of Tennessee, professional experience in our guidelines, we have to have 2 years experience, whereas CLARB is 3 years experience. So there's a conflict from what the state of Tennessee has and what CLARB has. We are using CLARB now as our guide. When somebody applies for licensure, it goes to actually they go take the exam first, which they require 3 years experience.
Well, I mean, in general, in the CLARB certification standards, it's
Right.
3 years under the direct supervision of a licensed landscape architect. But then they, in their experience section of the guidelines, they do allow up to 2 years of experience credit for experience under the supervision of engineers, architects, planners. So they have some other avenues, but in general, they do require 3 years under a landscape architect.
So think
There are some other provisions, though, some allowances made.
But the potential conflict would be somebody somebody from Tennessee wants to become licensed, and they have to go through the CLARB system. And in doing so, then there's a conflict potential with CLARB because they're looking for 3 years.
Well, it could be,
Could-
unless they qualify for one of the other avenues, like I said, but they can get up to 1 year experience credit for experience supervised by an engineer or an architect. But only half of that experience counts, so they'd have to have 2 years under, say, an architect to get 1 year of experience credit. So
Okay.
they have a formula that they apply to it.
Okay. Okay.
So I guess it would depend on the specific circumstances, but generally that's true. That they typically look for those 3 years under a landscape architect. And
Yes.
I would anticipate most applicants probably meet that criteria.
I know I was told that many, many moons ago, and I think that most of the young landscape architects, that's what they're focused on is 3 years experience. My only concern is I don't want there to be a conflict between them going to Clark and the state of Tennessee and creating some kind of issue in between. If there's no reason to change our rule, then why change it? But do you feel like that could be a conflict?
It could pose a problem, but I suspect in most cases they would qualify under some of the other avenues that were allowed by Clark.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can just leave this alone.
But do you have a mechanism, though, to let them appeal that or to?
Well, this is for a Clark certificate, not for license.
Okay, so I mean, it's not going to really impact our.
Clark certificate.
Okay.
It wouldn't impact their licensure here, but like it could impact their ability to obtain a license in another state, but probably not likely since they do have other avenues.
Other ways to do it.
Besides experience under a landscape architect.
Okay. So then it's not as difficult as I thought it would be, or the potential conflicts are not
Yeah,
as
where
great.
the issue arose is we, looking at the laws and rules, so we got a question from an applicant, do I need 2 years under a landscape architect or 3 years?
Right.
And that's where the question came up. We were looking at the law. The law specifies they have to have, like, I think at least 2 years in the office of a practicing landscape architect. So it looks like it only requires 2 years, not 3. But in the past, I think the interpretation was that since they need 3 years total experience, that there was, I think, a different view that really they needed all 3 under a landscape architect, but that's not really what the law says.
The law says 2. So an individual who has worked under a registered landscape architect for 2 years, and let's say that registered landscape architect leaves that firm, and there's no other LA, so they work another year. No matter what type of design firm it will be, that would still be meet
to be
the
under
state of
engineer or an architect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which would not be uncommon, I would think. So, committee members, we can leave it as it is?
Yeah, especially in light of it doesn't look like it negatively impacts Tennessee registrants.
Right.
I mean, it's just in their ability maybe to go get a Clark certificate, but really we need to kind of be focusing on what the Tennessee registrants, any hardship they would have.
Okay.
So I think we're probably good.
Okay, all right.
And plus, right now, it would be difficult to impose more stringent requirements on applicants. It would be hard for us to justify that to the authorities above us.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are
Okay.
rules that are making it easier for applicants to become licensed. We're not seeing as much backlash right now through the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office, but anytime we change the rule to make it tighter, we're seeing some problems.
So would the same thing be true if we were discussing, when we are discussing continuing education or professional development hours?
Yes, when we get to that portion, I can go into it a little further, but because that's making a bit harder requirements for licensure, and also because it's a bit controversial, and some licensees may not be comfortable with those changes, we'll have to do those rules as a rulemaking hearing instead of proposed rules, which is the typical way that we've gone about the rule changes.
Okay. So that was my next item of discussion, and I was wanting to explore the possibility of increasing health, safety, welfare PDHs for landscape architects from the current 7 per year to 9 per year. But what I hear you saying is this would be a difficult thing, or could raise the flag.
Well, we're planning on moving through with trying to do a rulemaking hearing. The structure is a little bit different. It invites for more public comment, and the public comment to be reported onto our rulemaking hearing filing that we file with the Secretary of State. So right now, with all of our professions wanting to look at changes to the PDHs, the type and the number. We've typed up proposed changes, and we're planning on moving forward with those. It just might not be as easy of a process as we typically see with the proposed rules.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not encouraging you to not pursue it. I'm just letting you know it might be a little bit slower of a process.
I understand. Okay. And another item for our committee, it's an interesting, I suppose, situation that arose with a landscape architecture graduate here in the state of Tennessee. Actually, this individual has been licensed in two or three other states for 35 years, I believe. He graduated from, trying to say it was maybe Clemson, but it was before the program was accredited. And long and short of it is he's been practicing for a long time, and because the landscape architecture rule is strict to stating that you must have a landscape architecture degree, he will never be able to become a landscape architect, a licensed landscape architect in the state of Tennessee. And I just wanted to throw that out and discuss that with you to see if that makes sense. I believe in the architectural and engineering side of the rules. You all do have provisions for a similar scenario.
But he's licensed in other states.
Yes, he's taken
And he's taken all the exams.
yes.
But because he didn't graduate from an accredited school.
Does Clark certify people like NCARB does? They do. So could you have it to where if Clark, is he a Clark member of Clark?
Yes.
Certified?
No, he may have let that go. But
If he were, would that be an avenue that Tennessee would say we would accept his registration if Clark has certified?
Yeah, that's what we do for the architects, right? If they have that certificate. Yeah, that might be an avenue. one
Might be a way
approach
to do it.
If they're licensed in another state.
right.
But if they're in state and they're not licensed anywhere else, that wouldn't help them, of course.
That's right. Well, this individual was licensed in California, Georgia, and I'm trying to say North Carolina, and retains at least Georgia, and that's where he took his exam, was in Georgia. It just seems unfair that someone with that much experience, that the accreditation of the school, which came about, I believe, 5 years later, that's the problem area. But that's why I wanted to throw this out and discuss this with you to see if I'm looking at this incorrectly. Yeah.
But I don't think that we have a mechanism in the engineering world to let them do that if they're from a non-ABET accredited school. We've got a 2-year window if they've applied, but if it's not within that 2-year window, their school to be ABET, we don't have the ability.
But they can be evaluated.
Well, that's right.
To
That's
determine
right.
if it's substantially equivalent. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't have that proper procedure for the landscape architects. There's no evaluation procedure.
Well, let me ask you, it's just a stupid question probably then. So have you had anybody just from the architect side that got a NCARB certificate that shouldn't be licensed in the state of Tennessee? I mean, that's a bad way to ask the question, but I mean, do you feel confident so that you don't have the other situation happening where you have somebody that's not deserving of a license? And just because, and the reason I'm asking that is probably because we've got situations where we have people with technology degrees that get licensed in other states, but we will not accept them in Tennessee. And I wonder if there's a similar situation, or is it consistent enough that it doesn't make any difference?
I don't think it makes any difference.
Okay, I mean, I just didn't want you to get caught on the flip side of that same thing, where you had somebody that was accredited by a national agency, but maybe you didn't feel that they were
Well, and even in the case of the architects, they would have the discretion to review
Okay.
their council record, and they could still deny them. It's not like mandatory. They
Okay.
have to approve of it if they have a certificate.
There's a pathway.
But under landscape architecture, we do not have that provision or anything similar that would give us that ability to do so. Okay.
I mean, that doesn't mean we can't look into adding that, especially since that would increase a person's ability to be licensed. That might be looked upon more favorably.
Absolutely. When I heard a story, it's a compelling story, and it's really sort of a shame that we, I think, that we don't have provisions for it. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, one other thing in your continuing education changes, I think the carryover hours, I think there's a sundown on it about 21 or 22.
21. Yeah. Okay. All right, that's all I have.
So are you interested in pursuing a statutory change?
Yeah.
Evaluation.
I mean, I think that, especially with the relatively young age that landscape architecture is, relative to the other professions, I think it's good to have some of another path. I mean, we've all got a different mechanism. I think it's probably a good thing to do that.
I would like to look into that and see how we can work with that. Okay. Good. Any other new business?
I have noticed.
Yeah.
Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We don't need it. We don't. Thank you.